Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everybody, to the Kevin Smith Drive-In Double Feature teaser for this week. Of course, we've got me, Ted, as the host, and we've got Ken.
Howdy.
And Eric.
Hey, man, what's up?
So we're going to start off like we've done in the past with these teasers. So, Eric, how did you become aware of Kevin Smith and his work?
Well, I was a late bloomer to the Kevin Smith phenomenon. I probably came in late 90s after Mallrats on video. So I didn't see either of Clerks or Mallrats in the movie. I actually saw on video, and after that I fell in love with it. Then went back and watched Clerks, and then everything after that I just loved.
And Ken?
Well, I was aware of this big noise about this independent film that came out. I didn't see it in theaters. I didn't find out till later on that it came out. And so I got it on video. I watched it right away. And then that led to other movies like Mallrats and Dogma and such of nature.
I came to know about Kevin Smith from a friend in high school. We were in class, and he had mentioned that he saw this video of this independent movie that was shot in black and white, and he couldn't stop laughing about it. And he knew that I was a movie guy, and he said that I had to see the movie. So I was probably 17. I was probably a little young even for Clerks at that point, based off of some of the nature of the show, but it captivated me. It captivated me like few others have. The only thing I can compare it to, ironically enough, is seeing Pulp Fiction. It changed how I view movies. And so that's how I came to know Kevin Smith. And then, of course, I've followed his career the whole way. I didn't see Clerks in the movie theater because I lived in a small town, and Clerks never made it to one of our two theaters.
It was only in about 50 theaters, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very limited release.
Yeah.
Didn't make much money.
Right. And I don't even remember Mallrats coming to our local theater. So I had to go out of my way to find it. And then when I moved up to Chicago, it was a lot easier to find. By that time, he was a bigger star. So I saw Dogma and Chasing Amy, all of those in the movie theater.
But one thing that did intrigue me was that somebody made a film for $28,000. I think I was around 22 when this movie came out. I was still a dreamer, and I was like, if he can make a movie for $28,000, maybe I could do something like that. And It was very interesting to see what he put out for $28,000.
It's very true. This was one of the first, that whole movement in the 90s where a no-budget movie goes on to become a cultural phenomenon. Because when I was a senior, or actually when I was a freshman in college, is when the Blair Witch Project came out, too. I don't know if Blair Witch Project gets made if something like Clerks didn't catch on and make Miramax a lot of money.
It definitely paved the way.
Wasn't there a movie called Slackers or Slacker?
Slackers was a Richard Linklater movie who also went on to direct Dazed and Confused, yes.
Which
that was a
influenced Kevin Smith dramatically.
Highly, yes.
Highly, yeah.
Yeah, because that was another movie that was very low budgeted that succeeded.
Correct. So, guys, we did kind of mention Miramax here. When everybody today thinks of Miramax, unfortunately, it's tied to
Show me
Harvey
where he touched
Weinstein.
you. Yeah, show me where he touched you.
And the Me Too movement.
And unfortunately, it's a part of history you can't erase.
Exactly. And it's
can't
hard.
erase his relationship with Harvey Weinstein and Miramax.
Exactly. And we're going to find the same thing later on when we talk about Quentin Tarantino. Unfortunately, these guys are connected to Harvey Weinstein. Kevin Smith's come out and apologized profusely for his connection to Harvey Weinstein. But without Harvey Weinstein, unfortunately, some of our favorite movies from the 90s never get made or don't find distribution. I know people are sensitive to this. I just wanted to toss it out there that unfortunately it might be brought up about Miramax, or unfortunately it might be brought up about Harvey, because what he did was horrific by any measure. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that just briefly to get that out of the way. That's a possibility. You could definitely hear that person's name. I did just touch on, in discussing the 90s filmmaking phenomenon that was the independent film circuit of the 90s. And Kevin Smith's definitely ingrained in that. How do you think he fits in with the rest of those 90s independent filmmakers?
I believe he's definitely one of the leaders of the independent movement of Renaissance movies of the 90s. He's probably influenced many, many directors, many producers, even many actors. I mean, look at some of the A-list people that have come out of his movies.
Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
Matt Damon.
Mm-hmm. Jason
Affleck.
Lee.
Yeah, Jason Lee.
Maybe not an A-lister, but Jason Lee is definitely a good actor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy for Affleck because he was doing those commercials, Affleck, and I'm happy that Kevin Smith was able to pluck him out of those duck commercials and put him into this. So
He plucked him, huh?
I like Kevin Smith, but I think Kevin Smith is a little overrated. I feel like his movies are inconsistent throughout the whole films. One of the movies that would be an exception to that would be Dogma. He's done well, don't get me wrong. I just feel like he's never really lived up to the potential people saw in him with this film. Outside of Dogma, he's never came back. Unless you can name me another movie outside of Dogma, he just hasn't really shown me anything since then.
I would.
Chasing Amy?
Yeah, that's the movie I was going to bring up exactly.
That's the movie that put him on the map financially.
I mean, that movie broke.
Was Chasing Amy before or after?
Chasing Amy was 97, Dogma was 99.
It was before Dogma.
Mm-hmm.
So after Dogma, though, he dies
After
out.
Dogma, he kind of, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, obviously. So you got a movie based on those two guys, which didn't do terribly good, but didn't do terribly bad. Now, for me personally, I like Jersey Girl, but I know Jersey Girl does not fit in the Ask-U-verse. I can't even say that. Help me. Ask-U-verse.
Ask-U-verse, yeah.
Ask-U-verse. We can edit that later. So I like Jersey Girl, but it does not fit in that genre. And then after that, I think it kindly goes downhill for Kevin Smith. I am not a fan of Clerks 2 at all. I wish he would have made Clerks 3. I know there's rumors of it. And then after that, it's just weird tangents of independent horror movies and him directing other people's work and him just going off into different tangents that is not typical of what he was doing when he was kind of like king of the independents in the 90s.
He was considered for Superman. And I could see why Superman did not fully come about. I just don't feel that he has the chops with given the right budget to do spectacular films. His time, I think, has passed. His dialogue has passed. If you see more recent films that he, like the reboot of even Jay and Silent Bob,
yeah,
he's rehashing old stuff, in my opinion, way past his prime. And
the characters are getting older. And I mean, these characters are 20 years old. I mean, if you were not a fan of Jay and Silent Bob and the characters in the 90s, I don't think you're going to jump on the bandwagon and generally like the reboot. You're right. I think, unfortunately, his style was great for the era, but now it's kind of faded away a little bit. But that doesn't take anything away from these movies whatsoever.
That's why he's talking about doing Clerks 3, Mallrats 2, because he doesn't have anything original out there. I appreciate Kevin Smith for what he was. He's that guy who he risked everything, put everything on his credit cards to do this movie, his first movie, Clerks, and I applaud him for that. And I love Dogma, but for me, that's it. Chasing Amy, it's okay. Chasing Amy, for me, is all over the place. And if we ever review that movie, we'll talk why. But that's where I stand with Kevin Smith.
I understand what you guys are saying. I do respectfully disagree a little bit with what you said. When he ventures out of the Askew-verse, it is hit or miss. I will say, I don't know if his voice is outdated. I think he's censored now. Let's be honest.
It's a different era.
Clerks doesn't get made today.
No, not at all.
There's no possible way you come in with that script and it gets made. It just doesn't. This is why he has went away from the major blockbusters, because of what happened with Cop Out. All of the originality that he had was taken out of the movie.
But he did not write Cop Out.
True.
He was just a director in that. So that was someone else's work.
Right.
That evolved very poorly, I might add.
It was. It's not a good movie. Tracy Morgan's really good though.
Well, that's because Bruce Willis was a jerk. He was a jerk to Kevin Smith.
He was a bully as well.
Yeah.
He didn't respect Kevin Smith and made the shoot horrible. Kevin Smith, to this day, talks about it as his worst moment as a director working with Bruce Willis, which is funny because they worked together in Die Hard 4, and then this happened.
It almost caused him to stop making movies. That's how disillusioned he was with it. So there are definitely some misses, but I don't think that he's lost his voice. In my opinion, I love Clerks too, and I'm probably in a minority. The movie makes me laugh every time I watch it.
I wish I could say that. I think it's a train wreck.
There are some aspects that
It
are...
is a typical, and unfortunately falls in this category with most sequels. Most sequels suck. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I'm sorry, this one sucks.
37
Because
times. It sucks 37
yeah,
times.
you're right. Maybe not even that much. I was unfortunately, like a lot of people, comparing it to the original.
Right.
And you set the bar so high on that
Right.
original.
It's tough.
It is.
I mean, because you want so much out of it, but I took it for what it was. I have a good time with it.
That's a different kind of
But
movie, Clerks 2, because
It is. It's a very different movie.
it's more
Much
visual.
different.
It's more visual. I mean, you got bestiality. So we'll touch base on maybe a little bit of Clerks 2 when we review Clerks 1. I think Clerks 2 is just where Kevin Smith is at in the second half of his career. He does more things like podcast and goes to these interviews, an evening with Kevin Smith. He does like comic book stuff now, and he's good at that. And maybe that's where he is more himself now. When he made this film, it was a student film, and I think he liked doing it that way, and I think he's uncomfortable doing it any other way.
We did kind of touch on his writing of the day. What he captures is real life dialogue. It's the dialogue of how you and your friend would talk in private, how you interact with each other. And sometimes you have to tell your friend, hey, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? I think he encompasses that a lot, especially in Clerks.
Well, why wouldn't he? Everyone in that movie is his best friend and buddy. Everyone he's grown up with. It's a perfect movie plot when you have everyone you know and you've grown up with to make this movie together with. These aren't professional actors at all.
And you can see that.
Well, true. But
the thing with the dialogue...
That's the fun of it, though.
I love his dialogue. However, and what I know about Kevin Smith is you can't change his dialogue. And you can see that in the movies. You can see that people are talking off of script. And I think that's another thing that Kevin Smith has a hard time with is somebody wanting to change what he does. They couldn't ad-lib during Clerk. That was like a no-no. And even when he was younger and he just did plays with his friends and stuff, they said that they couldn't change anything because if you changed anything, Kevin would go off on you.
That's a way with a lot of comedic writers. They're the same way. I think there's quite a few directors that are the same way as well. They don't like people to mess with their work. It's part of why some directors refuse to have the writer on set because the writer doesn't want his things changed. I think that his dialogue is witty. I think he fits very well, especially with that 90s raw dialogue. These are writers who grew up with various people who idolizing other people, kind of like an Eddie Murphy who is raw. That was the name of one of his movies. What you saw was what you got. Kind of like a George Carlin as well, who was ahead of his time as far as dialogue goes. I think he fits really well especially with a Quentin Tarantino, where their dialogue is iconic. There's so many quotable lines, it's hard to even choose, and a lot of lines from the movie that I still use in normal everyday.
Compare him to Tarantino, and I think that's probably good when it comes to dialogue. But when it comes to actual direction, he's nowhere near that class. He's just nowhere near Tarantino or any of those great directors. We talked about Cameron Crowe previously. He's nowhere near the director that those directors are.
I would agree. He's definitely in a different category. Cameron Crowe and Quentin Tarantino, I think, are far better directors. I think Kevin Smith's directing style fits the type of movies he was making at the time and fits the type of movies that he makes in his universe there. But once he tries to break out of it, it's a different movie, it's a different style, and it kind of falls flat on its face.
There are definitely times where that is the case. If it's a Kevin Smith movie, and I still get excited, and I will be there opening weekend for just about anything Kevin does. I'm a huge fan. I always have been.
Kevin is a great guy, and I watched a documentary on him, and once Clerks became popular and he was making money, he took care of all of his friends. I just thought that was great, and I root for him. When the movie comes out that he's directed or wrote, I'm hoping that it's a great film. I just haven't seen it in a long period of time. I'm still trying to get over Clerks 2. I'm with Eric on that one. It's just horrible. I do root for Kevin Smith and hope that he's able to reinvent himself in a way that makes me excited to see his movies again.
You know, Kevin Smith has gone down some newer routes in recent years. Obviously, he's lost a great deal of weight. He had a near fatal heart attack that changed his life. I think, in my opinion, kind of switching away a little bit from the movies and the directing and kind of going more into podcasting. He's got the comic book store in his hometown of Red Bank, New Jersey. He's got a lot of other avenues that he's kind of pursuing, which, let's face it, if you stick with the same thing that you're doing your whole life and you're not willing to change or go out and try something new, you're probably going to be forgotten.
It's very true. And something I want to touch on before we go for our teaser. Ken, you had brought up that he took care of his friends. And because we're talking about Clerks, and then we're going to be talking about Mallrats as our double feature, without Clerks and Mallrats, a movie like Good Will Hunting never gets made. Because with the success of Clerks and then the money that was made off of Mallrats, Kevin was able to go to Harvey Weinstein and say, there's a script here that's been rejected. It's by a guy who I've worked with in Ben Affleck. He and his best friend, Matt Damon, want to get this movie made. And he went to bat for Matt Damon and Ben Affleck to get Good Will Hunting made. I think that that's an endearing part of his legacy, that he was able to then take his independent success and leverage that so other first-time movie makers are allowed to come out and hone their craft, essentially. And it just so happened in this case, Good Will Hunting won Robin Williams his Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. It was nominated for multiple Academy Awards.
Damon and Affleck won for Best Screenplay.
Really helped put Miramax on the fast track with the serious movie houses.
Without Kevin Smith and Quentin Tarantino in the mid-90s, Miramax isn't a juggernaut. And like I said before, he can go by the merits of everything that Miramax did. Unfortunately, we now know a lot more about the inside part of Miramax that's not so savory. But I've always thought that was an interesting connection, that without Clerks and Mallrats, that are two movies, Good Will Hunting doesn't get made.
Crazy. That's one of my favorite movies, Good Will Hunting. I can just watch that thing over.
That's a movie that Shawshanks me every time.
Yeah.
If it's on, always have to see where it's at, and it'll usually take me right to the end. So if you guys don't have anything else to add to our Kevin Smith teaser for this week's two movies of Clerks and Mallrats, we will see you at the drive-in.